So we also are fortunate today to have with us, besides Ms. Nadya Seal, the filmmaker, Jeff McLoughlin. Thank you so much for coming. We're so happy to see you. And we're going to have a 30-minute question and answer period, so who would like the first question?
I will just start out by saying it's been a little while since I've seen this film, but it was really poignant, especially about 10 years plus removed from when the film was released, to see that there was it was a really good time for this film because there was a very decisive shift just right after this film for a couple of different management strategies. So there has been a lot of changes in how the Condor program was managed just even after that film was made. And then right now I think we're also in a pretty big shift. So it's actually a pretty poignant time to show this. And so if you do have questions about what those management changes were, I would be definitely more than happy to talk about this. This actually came out right before I started as an intern in 2013, so it was also really cool seeing all those old faces. And then also talking about where the program's going. But definitely if you have any questions about how the film was made, or even might have some audience participation of, the management and kind of the experiences prior to that, definitely feel free to ask any kind of question you want.
What are the changes since then? Because that's a long time ago.
Yeah. So, I think in a broader scale, there has been a bigger change in how the condors are tracked and monitored on a daily basis, as well as the approach to lead monitoring, and then in kind of a narrow scale, the approach to nest guarding and nest management. So, in a broader scale, one of the big things that has happened since that time, and a very good thing, is the population has increased and the habitat range has also increased. And unfortunately, the people on the ground, that number has decreased. And so we've had to adjust our strategy in that daily monitoring. Fortunately, the technology has advanced in a way. Joseph mentioned that there was GPS on birds that were tracking and giving hits every hour. We've actually changed that technology. Instead of going directly to satellites, it's been able to ping off cell phone towers, and that's been able to increase the number to up to once every 10 minutes, and in some geofenced areas, every 2 to 3 minutes. And so we have a lot more fine-scale precision for where the animals are. We're able to deploy more GPS on birds than we were at that time. And so, I don't want to say that we're doing more desktop biology, but we're kind of doing more desktop biology. But it's allowed us to not only get a finer scale idea of how condors are moving and utilizing the landscape, but we're able to put in some predictive models for that too. And that's allowed us to help, figure out how we can manage at that population level. Now, we're not quite there. We're not at that population level management. The numbers aren't at that point. But we do have to start treating, because of the resources that we do have in terms of personnel, in terms of funding, we really have to start thinking about how do we approach population level management if we can't get eyes or hands on every individual, twice a year or at that level that we were prior. How can we approach at the population level, making sure that we are making those management choices so that we can have that self-sustaining population, which is really that ultimate goal. In terms of lead, I'm really glad that Myra's work was on there, because that was really that turning point for how we approach lead. I mean, you saw, and Chandra can attest to this, the amount of birds that were coming in for treatment started to come at such a scale that it was becoming unsustainable. And we were learning more about the effects of chelation, not only the direct physical effects, because it's tough. It's stripping the metals, from those bodies. You have to flush out, the chelation that was injected, and you have to flush that out. So not only is there a physical toll that chelation treatment takes on the condors, but there's also a social toll that gets put on the condor when they're taken out of a population. And there were some condors that were in treatment for up to a year. And so if you think about that, the social effects, especially if they were a mated pair, especially if they had taken the time to secure a territory, putting them back in the population, it just takes time for them to build up that social capital again. And those were effects that we really didn't and still don't clearly understand. And so it's a big deal to take a condor out of the population to put in for treatment. And part of what Myra's work showed is that while we were in the field just getting snapshots of what their blood level was at that time, Myra actually was able to show how condors were basically purging themselves of lead and using their own natural immune system to get rid of the lead on their own. Now, that's not to say that lead is a good thing by any means, but what we were seeing is some of the birds that we were bringing in for treatment were actually on that down slope. And so they were, purging the lead, from that single source of exposure. They got to that high point, and then they were able to get rid of the lead on their own. And so it started to really come to us like, all right, if we have the resources, if we're pushing the resources and capacity that we have for lead treatment, if it's having that big physical effect on the condors and it's having the social effect, do we really want to start bringing every single condor that's over 35 micrograms per deciliter in for treatment? Is that really the best course of action? And so it was a little bit later that it was decided that we were only going to be bringing in birds that were symptomatic. And so if they were symptomatic, then we were going to bring them in for treatment. If they were not symptomatic, we were going to let them go. Now, that's a risky thing, because it was very much like, hey, we're going to stop, looking at field lead. And that was hard. That was hard for people at the time to shift. But there was a really good, sound decision-making process and understanding why that came to be. And there was a clause, if we saw a dramatic die-off of condors, yes, we were going to pull back on that management strategy. There's always that clause, which is why adaptive management is such an important tool for conservation, because we can't always predict the outcome. But fortunately, we didn't see that dramatic die-off, and we were able to free up some of the resources for those captive institutions, and we didn't lose some of that social capital. Now, that's not to say that chelation still doesn't have its place, because lead is still the #1 cause of mortality, for known mortality out there. It's still 50%. At this point, it's still 50% of the known causes. So it's still an important tool that we have, but it may not be a tool that we have to reach for all the time. And then again, kind of more myopically in terms of the nest guarding program, when the nest guarding program was initially put into place in 2007, it was because in Southern California there was a real issue with nest success, and this film very nicely kind of went over those reasons. And with the nest guarding program in place, with those nest entry interventions, the behavioral monitoring, we actually increased nest success 100% in its first year. And then from kind of about 12%, we're hanging right around 50-60%, kind of depending on the year. So it was great, but it was also a really intensive management, and we were going into nests regularly 6 times, sometimes even more if we had to go in for treatment or if we had to go in multiple times. And actually, when I got hired on in 2015, we had a banner year of 10 nests. And Joseph looked at it and he's like, we honestly don't have the man or woman power for this. We probably have a little bit more woman power, but we definitely don't have the manpower. And so we kind of had to shift. And at that point, we had actually had live streaming cameras in. In fact, that nest, South Potrero, in 2012, was the first nest that we put a live streaming camera in. 2015, we went live to the public. We have a live streaming nest camera now for the first time in Bitter Creek. Just a little plug-in for that. And we had a lot of data, and so we did actually start to pull back on the number of entries that we did. We were only going back if we saw, above 50 pieces of trash. We were still going into tag because it was still really important for us to understand what the fledge rate was. The tagging also put in trackers that allowed us to recover bodies, because understanding cause of mortality is a really, really important process for conserving species. I will also say we stopped swapping out infertile eggs, and we never put a chick inside of an egg again. That was actually a one-time thing. So kudos for you for catching like a one-time event.
There were so many fortuitous things about
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
They did it a lot in captivity. We only did it once in the wild, to my knowledge. But one of the things that also came out of work that Myra did alongside with Vicki Backer is that they understood that the most critical part of a condor's life was when it fledged from 6 months to when it was 2 years old. And we also didn't see any truly different behavioral effects long term in terms of securing a mate, getting a territory, producing offspring. We didn't actually see any difference between captive reared chicks and wild reared chicks. And that was great. That actually was a really good thing for the program because it meant that we could still rely on this wonderful, awesome, captive breeding source. And really, the captive breeding is what has brought the levels to where they're at now. And it's really probably the most important management tool that we have. And so instead of, putting animals from the zoo into, a state where it's actually a really critical, part of that condor's life where they do have the highest level of mortality. Instead, we decided to pull back on that risk. If it wasn't a fertile egg, we'll pull it, give them a chance to potentially lay another egg that season. Or if not, you know what, in the wild, that's what would happen. And let's raise this chick in captivity, have it safe through that, kind of critical component of its life where it's very vulnerable to predation, vulnerable to just, unfortunately, being a youngster and making bad decisions, because that's what happens a lot of the time. And let's let it be safe. Release it at 18 months when it has a higher chance of kind of getting past that vulnerable period in its life. And so those were some of the changes that we've made in the last 10 to 15 years since this film came about. And that's really what you see in conservation and endangered species. You want that intensive management, high resources. We're going to put a lot, get past that hurdle, and then get into, all right, what's going to be self-sustaining through this period when we're at individual level management, and now how can we pull back even more at population level, and then hopefully how can we go hands off, maybe just check in when they're delisted. So very long answer, but yeah, those are some of the changes.
Outlawing lead bullets was successful.
Oh, what?
Outlawing lead ammunition was successful.
That's a fun topic. So interestingly enough, so the movie touched on the Ridley Tree Act, and yes, it is important. We do need to get lead out of the system. The way that the Ridley Tree Act was formed, though, it was pushed in a way that there was a lot of feeling of anti-gun with some of the groups that were trying to push for getting lead out. And when it really comes down to it, hunters can provide a really important source of food for condors. There aren't the same level of apex predators on the landscape, and so condors rely on those predators to provide those carcasses out on the landscape for scavengers. And so we can provide those carcasses, we can provide that food source as long as it's clean. So we want to work with the hunters. Hunters are really, North American hunting is actually a really good model for conservation. They're some of the the leading funding sources for conservation comes out of hunting and recreation.
Excise tax.
Yeah, and so the next form of legislation, and that got put in 2014, was the full California ban. And where that legislation did a really good job, and where we learned from the Ridley Tree Act, is that it has to be a grassroots effort. It has to be peer-to-peer education. It has to be people who are hunting, people who want to continue the tradition of hunting, people who like using, guns, like the recreation, like the sport of it, understand the ranching need, for having, guns for pest control, for predator control, We need to have those peer-to-peer conversations. We can't be evangelizing, how we need to take guns out of the system. They're there. They can provide a utility source, but we have to do it in the right way. And so it has to be that behavioral shift. And so what happened over the 5 years of the current act is we did that. We did that slow adoption of the policy. In 2019, it was fully in place. So in California, you can't use lead. Some circumstances, I won't get too into that because I'll probably say something that's not right. But essentially, there's no lead in California. Now, interestingly enough, we have a nice comparison of Arizona. Arizona doesn't have legislation that bans lead, but they've done an educational approach. And they go out there, they have the educational approach, they offer, programs to switch ammunition, to have different alternative sources of ammunition, bring in your gut, return your gut pile, get a box of bullets. They have incentives, and what they do is they offer the hunting and recreational and sports community the opportunity to become educated and make the right decisions themselves, and they've had over 90% compliance. And so that's where we are really trying to, and we have learned, and I say we as the whole Condor program, has really understood that we have to be having those conversations. We have to be, having that peer-to-peer. We have to be modeling it ourselves. We can't be evangelizing it. And we have to get that human behavioral shift to understand the importance of not only that lead is bad for condors, because, somebody doesn't care about condors. Well, I don't want to be their friend, but I understand that there are those people out there. But lead is also bad for eagles. They're bad for all scavengers. They're also bad for you. Yeah, if you're going to be hunting and using that meat for your family, it's amazing. You can get a kill shot, like take the guts out, but a little fragment of lead can be way back here, and it taints your meat. And so it's approaching those conversations, just saying lead is bad for everybody.
Well, the hunters in our neighborhood complained bitterly about it, but I assume they were cooperating.
You know what, and I think that we would, and again, our outreach staff, they're amazing, and they can speak to this. They actually go and chat with those hunters. He's saying that there is compliance, and I think there is, a good amount of compliance. But
I heard it's more accurate than lead the non-lead is more accurate than lead bullets.
So in terms of the performance, in terms of the performance of the ammunition, they have tried to make non-lead ammunition that is comparable to its lead counterparts. Now, in terms of cost, in terms of all of that, you can say, well, this lead is cheaper than this non-lead, but you have to look at, bullet for bullet in terms of performance standards. And they have tried to make enough of the supply of the non-lead ammunition to have a comparable source, because they did outlaw it. And in terms of compliance, I think, there are compliance, but the thing is, it's not just the compliance for non-lead. You're still trying to figure out how to enforce hunting laws in general. And even before the non-lead laws and regulation went into place, there are hunting laws that are constantly broken. And so enforcing any kind of hunting law, any kind of wildlife infringement law, that just kind of gets lumped into that category. Unfortunately, with lead and condors, it doesn't take much on the landscape. So there was one study, and albeit this study is actually pretty old, so it'd be interesting to see if this would still hold true, but there's one study that said, if there's a minuscule amount of lead on the landscape, it was like 2 to 3% of the carcasses were contaminated with lead, up to 50% of the condor population could be affected by it. And that's partly just because they're such social creatures. Once they see one, condor down on the ground, they think, great, this is free of predators, free food, let's get in, let's go for it. And, we can actually visualize feeding events through GPS data because we can see that flocking. And we can understand the landscape that they're flocking to and say, yeah, that's a very likely a feeding event. What's great is that because of that GPS data, because of understanding where those food sources might be, we can track if that's private land, if it's owned by somebody. And hey, guess what? We got an outreach person that we can throw your way and start that dialogue and just make sure that there's no lead being used in that area. And so that's really been that approach.
I was wondering, I remember seeing a leaded pig that you were autopsying, and was that from the Carrizo Plain?
No, it was shot in the San Ynez Valley.
It was in the what valley?
The San Ynez Valley.
San Ynez Valley.
This was asking about a pig that was
Because,
shown on the
when I was
film.
camping, or when we've been camping in Carrizo Plain,
Yeah.
there's a large group of hunters there, which is fine. I own guns and have them in what do you call those things?
Gun safes.
Yeah. And donate them and whatever.
Yeah, the Carrizo Plain it is technically a national monument, so there's a small portion that is under the National Park Service, and that you can't hunt on, but the majority around the Carrizo Plain is Bureau of Land Management.
Yeah, I knew that.
Yeah,
Still.
but yeah, if you that was in San Ynez, I guess.
Yeah, that was something that was a separate film. That was a segment from a separate film that was actually an outreach piece for hunters
Okay.
on why you would make the switch from lead to copper bullets. Yeah, with a guy named Anthony Pareto. If you ever encounter him, he's just a evangelist for it. And as a kid, worked in the Condor program as a volunteer, and it's affected his whole life. He's just really a cool, interesting character.
And
But
he
hunts,
does-
he goes to Montana every year to hunt elk, and he's a very passionate hunter. But he also had a great experience as a kid with condors, and that affected his perception of ethical hunting. Yeah.
The
And he has a
must have
film
been
coming out,
shot
so.
Before drones were available, right?
I'm sorry?
The film was shot before drones were available?
Yeah, but even if drones were available and they were coming online at that time, I would never fly a drone in and around a
Birds don't
condor.
like 'em. How did
I watched a condor chase a golden eagle down Hopper Canyon. And if you've ever seen a golden eagle and the talons in a golden eagle, they're fearless. The condor just ran it out because it was in proximity to the nest.
So how did you capture all the soaring that you could track for so long on the soaring?
Just being out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the film was made over 3 years.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and that footage in the nest, Joseph went in with a camera on his helmet, and some of it was shot with a phone, some of it was shot with GoPros, some of it was shot with, all manner of.
We have a question over
Yeah.
there.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for making this beautiful film.
Thank you.
It's very emotionally tugging at my heartstrings. Could you give us some background on what was your motivation for making the film? You already said it took you 3 years to make it. What kind of a budget did you have? Did you have people assisting you, or what, did you do all the work yourself?
Yeah, no, it arose from an article in the Santa Barbara Independent by Matt Kettman, who actually finessed the script for me in the end. And he wrote an article that included references to Joseph Brandt and the whole field program. And I read that and thought that was just a killer subject for a film. And I just finished my corporate career and had studied film, always wanted to make films. And I thought this is what I'm going to focus on. And so it was self-funded. I spent an obscene amount of money and got very little of it back. Yeah. Although gratifyingly, it's used in educational programs all around the country. It was in educational distribution for about 3 years, and every major, University of Oregon to you name it, it's been used in educational programs. So I take that.
Thank you for your labor of love. We really
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, it was fun. The neat thing about these kind of projects is that I would never have met Chandra Dravid or Joseph Brandt or all these passionate people. And when you meet these people, you recognize, it ain't about the money. I can tell you that. They're repelling
No,
in
it's
the
not.
nest. As you can imagine, it's a somewhat life-threatening, enterprise. It's passion. So you tell people's passionate stories, and you end up with a passionate film. Yeah.
Earlier we had heard that there were record number of captive eggs this year in the different zoos. So what's happening? These positive things coming out of that?
Yeah, so the question is that, hearing that there's record number of captive eggs in zoos. And I alluded to that a little bit before, but a few years ago, again, Myra Finkelstein worked with a Professor Vicki Backer, and they created what's called a population viability analysis, or PVA. And essentially that's actually a really important tool in species conservation. For instance, the island fox, Vicki Backer made a PVA for the island fox, and that really helped to bring that species down. That was the fastest recovered mammal under the Endangered Species Act. So it's an important tool because essentially what it does is it boils down, and this particular PVA, boiled down the different management approaches and what was going to yield, for lack of a better term, layman's term, more bang for your buck. So what management tool and in what priority and in what resources devoted to those different management tools was going to yield the most number of condors in the shortest period of time. And when they really looked at all the different management approaches, nest guarding was one of them, all these different things that we've done, captive releases just came out, again, far and above the tool that really will get condors to where they needed to be. And again, as Jeff emphasized in the film, condors lay eggs, one egg every other year. That's very typical. Some condors will lay an egg every year, but more typically it's every other year. And they reach adulthood to nest at 5 to 6 years, but really they have a little bit of time where they need to secure that territory, get that mate. So you can really imagine that reproductive strategy, it's a long-term thing. And so we needed to get condors out. Now condors can do something that's called double clutching. So a clutch is the number of eggs laid at a single time. Condors will lay a single egg in a clutch. If that egg is taken away early enough in the kind of egg laying process, which starts, in the wild, typically like February through May is the egg laying season. Down in San Diego, they've actually had eggs laid as early as December. But if you take away an egg early enough in that process, the condor could lay another egg, and in some situations can lay a third egg. So if you're taking these eggs and you're either artificially incubating them and hand rearing them, or if you're giving them to foster parents and allowing those foster parents to rear, well, now you've turned an every other year chick production machine into a 2 to 3 per year chick production machine. And when you're looking at those numbers, man, the condor numbers that you can have just are through the roof. And so there was really this emphasis looking at the captive breeding programs and saying, hey, Chandra, what can you do at the LA Zoo to boost your numbers? Hey, San Diego, what can you do to boost your numbers? We've even been approached at the Santa Barbara Zoo, say, hey, is there any way that you can make an off-site captive breeding center? And we're like, yeah, what can we do? That's way down the line. But they really looked to these captive breeding centers and said, hey, if we want to get the condors to a position, to those numbers, kind of before we run out of resources and funding to really get them to where we need to go, this is where we need to focus our efforts. And so if you're seeing, and it's not like the captive breeding centers were, sitting on their laurels. They were trying to maximize. And again, that speaks to what they've been able to do to say, all right, well, we've been given this challenge. How can we further maximize? So the fact that you're hearing that there's record numbers of eggs is a testament to what they've been able to kind of pull out, with their facilities and everything. So that's why, and hopefully that can continue and we can get those numbers up. As of the end of last year, I think we're at 566 condors total. The captive breeding program kind of stays steady at around 200, but they're looking at ways to kind of maximize that production.
Amazing.
How is Utah and the rest of the country doing in terms of lead?
That's a really good question. I know California, and I would love to say that I can't answer that question. I don't know, but I would very much encourage you to go with to the website Hunting with Non-Lead. They have all the current information. They do the lead outreach. have been trying and to maintain funding for an outreach person that's specifically working with the Condor program. But lead is an issue for any scavenging. I mean, lead is not a Condor issue.
Right.
Lead is in anything that eats it is a bad, yeah. That's why, we took lead out of paint. That's why we took lead out of pipes. That's why, the acceptable level for people is 0, because lead is bad for everybody.
And is there still a Condor nest watching?
That's a very good question. Part of our scaling back of the nest guarding program was scaling back those observations, and so right now we don't have a volunteer nest guarding program. I hesitate to say this, but we've actually added drones into our Condor nest guarding program. But we've done it in a very no, we don't.
I would only laugh when I watch the Condor take a drone out.
we have very strict protocols in place that Fish and Wildlife that we worked with Fish and Wildlife Service on. We're actually understanding raptor behaviors around drones as part of it. But we've tried to scale that back because, again, I mean, just this year we've had 13 nests, and it's been pretty wide-ranging, and some of these nests are in really, really rough places to go visit. We have an amazing biologist that will go places that nobody else in there, everybody was like, oh yeah, we can't go there. He's like, yeah, I'll just go there in the day, no big deal. And he sends a picture like, oh, I found the nest. I'm like, how?
Yeah.
And so they're in really remote places, and so we have to. So what we've had to do is we've had to go back kind of to the drawing table and say like, hey, what are the data points that we need, to maintain this long-term data set, and to understand nesting success. What are the points where we need to get that information, and we've had to pare it down. Again, that funding and resource allocation, staff allocation is part of it, but also, the Condors are expanding their range, they're expanding their numbers, and it's just not feasible to do the same level of monitoring that we did beforehand. And honestly, I don't want to subject you to some of those hikes. I've done some of those hikes myself. I've checked that box. I don't want to go back to some of those places. We are live streaming. There are some opportunities. I'd say one of the best opportunities for people to help with condor conservation is volunteering with Friends of California Condor Wild and Free. They've provided a really great opportunity for not only outreach and education, but there's refuge work days. We appreciate when we can, drive on the refuge, and there's not, when there's trails that we can hike, and we don't have to be, climbing through Manzanita.
Yeah, it's fun. I get out there and whack weeds.
Yeah. And those are some of the ways that we've really been diverting volunteers.
Really fun.
Could you say where some of the condors are now? Because I know that they're not just in Southern California.
Yeah. So in terms of their current range, so there's several different release sites. Starting up north, the most recent release site is in the Pacific Northwest, and so the Yurok tribe had been working to bring condors back to their historic lands, and so they partnered with the National Park Service of Redwood National Park, and they created a release site up there. I believe there are 18 condors now. They started releasing in the late 2020s, I think 2021, 2022, somewhere around there. When they started. So that's the newest release site. They have a bunch of juveniles up there. They don't have any that are mature enough to nest. In Central California, there are 2 release sites. In Big Sur, they kind of manage the coastal Central California condor population, and then Pinnacles National Park manages more of the kind of inland central population, but they really co-manage the Central California population together. Southern California is managed by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and so our population, get a little bit more nitty-gritty, is like kind of Santa Barbara backcountry down to where Fillmore is, and then they've expanded their range up to the Tehachapi. They've actually gone into, they've broached Yosemite Park borders, so they've actually traveled up there. We see them regularly up in like the Sequoia area. So again, when we talk about range expansion, I mean, our biologists are tasked with, watching 100 condors within this range. There's also a release site in Arizona, the Vermilion Cliffs, And talk about a grand scale. I mean, they have to do their nest guarding program. They don't have a nest guarding program formally, but they have to track nests in the Grand Canyon. So good on them. I mean, I complain about us, but oof, we're not climbing the Grand Canyon. And then
She's talking
Baja,
about
California.
a lot of non-public places, but
Yes.
I can tell you 2 places where you can see them. Yeah, I couldn't tell you on any specific day if they're going to be there, but very, very frequently. We've seen them in pinnacles. And if you do the hike into where the cave is, and I
Bear
forget
Gulch hike.
It's Bear Gulch, is that what it's called?
Yeah.
Very commonly, you'll see them, not just 300 yards away, but you'll see them close. And there's a turnout on Big Sur, and they've just opened Highway 1 again recently. There's a turnout that's right near, I'm trying to think of the name of that little gallery there. I can't think of it, it's right in the middle. But it's like on any sunny day, you'll see them because there's a seal haul out,
Yes.
a sea lion haul out down below, and you'll hear them. You'll hear the sea lions down there. And the birds are hanging out waiting for the occasional
one that
seal that's
stops
not going to
moving.
make it. Yeah, and they scavenge on them. Yeah, I shot footage there frequently. And I made that trek, and it's a long trek to get up there. You'll see them. Yeah.
What's happening to the birds during the shutdown?
Well, they've shut down too. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. They're like, we're a federal species. We've shut down too. So we do. So currently, right now, in Southern California, we have the captive-bred releases that were transferred to the Bitter Creek Flight Pen. We have 2 that are in the Hopper Flight Pen, and we're just kind of getting those birds ready for release. Now, there was 2 exempted staff members for U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service for the refuge side, and so they actually can continue through the furlough. We have technicians, Condor technicians through ACE, the Army Corps of Engineer, and then actually our Santa Barbara zoo biologists are able to take up, that we're able to work on the refuge, we're able to help out with the
So
condors.
you're still doing, somebody's monitoring?
Yeah, so we are still monitoring, we are still trapping birds. We just actually released the first 2 releases of the cohort this year, and they're doing well, they're being monitored. So honestly, one thing that I can say, speak highly to of the Condor Recovery Program is the intense level of cooperation and collaboration. It is not just one organization or agency. There's Jeff did a really good job listing like all those names, all those organizations at the end, and it's that and then some.
Yeah.
And it's because of
I would
that.
call out the zoos. Really, it's pretty
Yeah,
remarkable
I didn't know
what the zoos have done from San Diego and Los Angeles, which is a city organization, and it blows my mind that they put the resources into it that they have put into it. And then the Santa Barbara Zoo has done remarkable stuff with the nest watching program.
In the one part of the film, I know you said it was several years old, they were talking about the plastic that was being ingested in the food from the baby. And I keep thinking, where did they get the plastic? Although nowadays they're talking about microplastics in humans, right?
Yeah.
But since these birds are in the desolate area, where would they get that plastic?
Well, they're not really. I mean, a lot of that there's like a transmission tower. You familiar with this? It's up there above Ojai, where it's kind of a hangout, and people go up and plank, shoot up bottles and stuff. And it's not just plastic. The reason they do it, and Nadya can talk to it better than I could probably, is to a condor, they have to have a certain amount of calcium, right, to develop their bones. So the parents will bring chips or things that the birds will ingest, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, and they don't know the difference between a bottle cap and a piece of bone. It's a hard object to them, so that the stuff they pick up is in the environment and
Yeah, I mean, they're exhibiting, appropriate behaviors in an altered environment. And so the things that they would cue on, for those calcium supplement, shells, bone chips, they're looking at things that are small, shiny, hard, which
And you
sounds
said
like a
this
lot
is
of...
like a 10-year-old movie, so are they still you're still doing that same routine of trying to.
So, I mean,
Sound.
honestly, that's a really great question, because it kind of gets at one of the reasons that we were able to scale back from our nest guarding program is trash was a big issue. And when it came to selecting the release sites for the condors, there were 3 release sites that were considered. Bitter Creek, Hopper, and Tejon were the 3 release sites that were originally considered for releasing the condors back in the 1990s. Ultimately, Hopper was chosen, even though it had that proximity next to LA, and there was an understanding that there could be an urban impact. Now, there was, I won't go too much into that, but when we did understand that trash was an issue, when we did understand that it was impacting chicks, because the adults were feeding it to them, and the chicks didn't have the same ability to regurgitate on that frequent basis that the adults were, which is why trash doesn't really affect the adults like it does the chicks. It became an issue. However, part of the nest guarding program was pulling that trash out. Now, I think there's probably 3 reasons why trash isn't as much of an effect that we're seeing for nest failure. One is that they have expanded their range, and so the dilution of those high trash sites are in this range. Now they're not as close to LA anymore, when they're ranging up to almost Yosemite. So there's a dilution of trash on their landscape just by virtue of their expanding habitat range. 2, unfortunately, and this isn't there's a silver lining, but it's also still very unfortunate. A lot of the adults that were kind of the trashier pairs, the ones more likely to get the trash, aren't around anymore. And secondly, and this hasn't been proven, but this is something we've talked about. By pulling that trash out of the nest, we didn't give the chicks that same object to cue in and learn from anymore. And so part of the hope was that, and some of this the nest, we did scatter some like bone chips in to redirect their behavior and their learning process. And so by removing some of that trash, the hope was that they wouldn't cue in and pick that up as like, oh, this is something that's good, and kind of bring that on to the next generation. So we're kind of thinking that maybe between those 3 things that has dampened the effect of trash on chicks. Now, we haven't looked to see at what level any of those effects are, but that's just kind of the running hypothesis in the group.
Fascinating.
So I have a question for three.
Yeah, there's a question for 3 of us.
Okay, so I would say, what is your most memorable, fabulous moment that was most impactful for you?
The question is, what's the most memorable and impactful moment for all 3 of us, Chandra, myself, and Jeff?
You have had a moment that you just can never forget.
For me, I guess so many. Sorry. You really just can't have one when you've done this for 30 years. But to be honest, the day AC9, he was in captivity after being caught in the wild, and I had him under my care for many, many years. So the day he was being scheduled to be caught up and taken back to the wild, I had to do my morning check, and I walked in and looked through a little window, and he was just hiding behind the window. He knew something was back there, but he couldn't see me. But I just remember going, you have no idea what's in store for you. And to just say goodbye to him and hope he was going to be okay, that was pretty impactful. And he did really well for years. And unfortunately, when we got word that he was no longer around, that was pretty devastating. But we knew this could possibly happen. But yeah, saying goodbye to a bird that was an original wild bird, and then giving him that chance to get back in the wild, and then going to his nest myself and having him pick at my ankles while I'm working with this chick, pretty amazing.
Something to tell the grandkids.
Yeah, and Chandra alluded to it. Actually, this isn't my most impactful, but I remember that day that AC9 went missing, and Joseph and I went to go track him, and we looked back at his nest, and he was such a diligent, sire. He was such a diligent dad, and when we realized that he hadn't gone back to his nest, we knew. Typically when a condor goes missing in the wild, we give the bird a year before we declare them missing in the wild, and I remember we declared it that day, and that was that was a tough day. And I remember seeing Joseph, like, it was also tough because we couldn't find him. And part of me, like, always wished that he just dropped the mic, left, and he's just still out there somewhere. But, you know, he would also never abandon his chick. And that was a rough hike. But I would say for most memorable moment, it was actually when I was an intern with the Condor program. I was trying to watch all of our pre-releases as well as capture. So we trap at the same time we trap in the fall. You know, the idea was that we would trap around hunting season to be able to capture any lead exposures. Truth is, condors can be exposed to lead year-round, but that was the thought when that process was created. And it was just me alone out there, and I saw Condor 289 fly up on top of the flight pen and have a seizure and fall off. And she was just on the ground. And in my head, as this technician or intern that's been out there for like maybe a couple months, I was like, oh my God, I just saw a condor die. Like, just right in front of me, I just saw a condor die. And I just ran, and it was a Monday. I remember it was a Monday because that's like the weekly meeting that all the condor biologists get together in Fish and Wildlife Service. They have their meeting, they set their schedule, and I remember it was a meeting. And I ran out to the car. I had no reception, and I just drove as fast as I could to reception. I got on the phone, I'm like, Josh, I just saw a condor have a seizure and fall off the flight pen. I think it's dead. And, you know, he's like, well, can you go check? And so I went to go check, and she had actually righted herself. And he asked if I would be comfortable netting her. I'd never netted a condor in my life. And I was like, sure, I'll try. And I went out to the net, and I was just like, slowly, and she looked at me like, what are you doing? I was like, I can't do this. Like, I'm doing this. I'm going to get her away. And he's like, whatever you can do to trap her. And so I went and grabbed some rabbits. One of the effects of lead is that it actually stops the body's ability to digest food. And so the meat will get stuck in the crop, and it'll actually start rotting in the crop. It's what we call crop stasis. It's terrible. Chandra can probably tell you horror stories about this. But they're very hungry, and they really want water. They want water and food. And so I ran back to grab rabbits. Now, at the time, you're told, like, do not habituate. Like, don't let the condor see you with food. So I was like, it's during the daytime. This condor's going to see me with food. And so I put on a poncho, and I had the rabbits underneath this poncho. I was like, I can't tell anybody that I've done this because I'm not supposed to do this, but I need to trap this bird. And so I tried to hide behind the car and get into the flight pen, and I opened up the double door trap, and I threw the rabbits in, and she came in right away, and I trapped her. I was like, oh, thank God, I trapped her. Joseph came up the following morning. He told me he was going to come up first thing, and I'm still sitting in bed. I hear the car. I was like, oh shit. And I get out, and the two of us go to the flight pen, and he works her up, and he trapped her, and he said, do you smell that? And I was like, what? He's like, that smells like lead. There's a distinct smell. And he knew right away. It's she's lead, she has lead poisoning. So we took her down to the zoo. And at that point, my internship ended, but I actually started up at the LA Zookeeper class. And so I was doing the LA Zookeeper class, and the zoo folk actually invited me down to see her. And it was pretty incredible talking to them, because she had gotten down to 9 pounds, which was half of her weight. There were many times where I talked to Jenny, and she's like, I've advocated for euthanasia several times, but their crew is so amazing. They pulled her out of it. A year later, she was released, and when I started in 2015, she nested again, and that was one of my first nests that I was able to see. And then even in a slightly chilling moment, I do some of the social media, and I just happened to be looking up condor hatch days, and I looked up hers, and she had the same hatch day as my mom's birthday. I was like, oh, okay. So she's always been forever, that was my moment of okay, I'll never forget that. Your turn.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing was, I had no background in biology. It was all new to me, learning the whole thing and encountering these guys and the passion they bring to the job. But, that bird, Patashi, who's the star of the film, just had a remarkable history. I want to say she was born in San Diego. She was born in San Diego Zoo, do you know? She was in LA Zoo.
LA.
Yeah, but she was in and out of the zoo. She was apparently just a pain in the ass, and for whatever reason, she would get in trouble. They put her in the zoo, and then eventually she was released again and nested with 247. And I think later on she actually nested with another. That pair.
Oh my
broke up.
gosh, there was such a that's where the hashtag Condor Wives of Hopper Canyon. Like she was the reason behind that hashtag on her
Really?
social media.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that's a fun story.
Yeah.
I'll tell
So,
it.
I mean, it's tragic that I heard well after the film was done that she died. You know, she's come to lead. 2023. So 10 years after the film was finished. Yeah. So that, tragic story. But the silver lining is that 599 just nested last year, right?
I have been advocating
Yeah.
for a Condor Shadow 2 with 599 as a star.
Yeah.
At Fish and Wildlife Service, I keep pitching it. So
Yeah, just a wonderful, outcome there.
Yeah. Yeah, she's been nesting for a couple of years.
Yeah. And that whole scene where he put the chick back in the egg, I swear he didn't do that for me. It was totally fortuitous that happened. The whole thing was just. There were so many things about that film production that were fortuitous. Like at the time, Joseph didn't have a boss. Like if he had a boss, I never would have got to make the film at all. I never let me out there. Yeah. It was quite the project. Yeah.
Thank you guys.
One more question? Anyone else?
So Potassi, I'm just gonna, because I left you on a cliffhanger with the Condor Wives of Hopper Canyon, and I will just answer that because it's a really fun story. 79 and 247 they were a given. It was just a given that 247, 79, they're gonna nest whether the egg was fertile or not. Chances are it probably wasn't if it was 247 in the mix. And it was a given. And so we were like, okay, they're nesting. So we saw 247 come out of a cavity. Now I will say there was a gal, 156, who was always hanging around. She was always trying to nudge in to a pair. And so in 2016, we saw 247 come out. We're like, okay, 247, 79, they're nesting in a new place. Okay, they've got it. And then all of a sudden, 156 came out of the nest. And then all of a sudden, 79's over there with 374. We're like, what is going on? We had already sent it out. It's like, oh, 79, 247, they're in a new spot. We're good. And then we had this new guy who was like, I saw 156 come out. I'm like, yeah, no, you didn't, because you're new. You didn't know what you're talking about. I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure I did, though. I was like, no, because there's no way that 79 would leave 247. Turns out she did. And she made the right choice because she went on and had chicks. He and 156 they keep trying. Good Lord, they keep trying. In fact, they had 2 attempts this year. They were 2 of our 13 nests. They keep trying. They never give up.
But not happening.
Yeah, but not happening. 247. Oh gosh.
So all the birds have numbers, but one has a name. Why is that?
Well, it had a number 2. Yeah. It's because it had such a nefarious history in and out of the zoo. Yeah. I guess that's the reason. It's a Chumash name, right?
Yeah, they said
Chumash.
Yeah, and to be honest, I can't remember what it means at this point.
Yeah.
But, but it is.
Yeah, and so all condors are given what's called stud book numbers. It's kind of like a social security number. You can think about it. Just that if they hatch, they get a stud book number. Some get names as well. So Ventana will give names. They're a nonprofit. It engages their crowd. Yeah, keepers, it's hard to not have keepers give animals names. I know in the zoo world, no, don't give them a house name. Don't give them a house name. But yeah, that's just, kind of bird to bird. They will sometimes pick up a name or be given a name.
What's the longest that any of these birds in this program has lived? The movie said lifespan of 50 years. The program hasn't been going that long, right?
Oh, that's Topa Topa.
Really?
So we know Topa, he's stud book number 1, and we know that he is going on, he's 58, he's going on 59. No, he's a year older than I am. So he's 59 now. And he's still breeding.
Excellent.
So, in the zoo. So, but there are other birds we don't know their age, and they could be older, like Tama, number 11. She could be older. She looks older than he, but we don't know. So we can just say with him, he's 59 and breeding. Not well, but he's doing it.
Thank you so much for all the wonderful questions.